Thank you, Bongo. Now, Cricket South Africa has published the report compiled by the Social Justice and Nation-Building Ombudsman, Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza, following the hearings that took place this year. The hearings focused on the causes, nature and extent of racial discrimination and lack of transformation in all cricket structures since unification 30 years ago. Joining us to talk about this is senior sports reporter at News 24, Khanyiso Tswakhu. Khanyiso, welcome to the program. Thank you very much for joining us. I think you're going to come up on my shot shortly. If you can hear me though, Khanyiso, let's start possibly with the two people in question here. Straight to it, Mark Boucher and Graham Smith. Let's start with Graham Smith. We saw the report say, well, how he got the job, especially after his contract ended, was unlawful. And these are questions that most of us in the space raised, especially when there are people who have been at Cricket South Africa who are qualified to be at the top of cricket in South Africa.
Good evening, Khanyiso, and good evening to the viewers. I mean, it has been something that has been debated thoroughly. I mean, ever since Graham Smith actually got the job as the South Africa's director of cricket, the manner in which the job was actually, the way in which he got the job, along with Mark Boucher, something that has been a source of constant debate. If you remember, at the start of SJN, Dr. Eugenia Kula Ameyaw actually spoke about that particular appointment process at length, from where former Cricket South Africa CEO Thaba Moro also explained how that particular process went down. So I think in that sense, the SJN report has kind of served a purpose where it has highlighted the governance flaw. I mean, if you remember, over the past 2 to 3 years, in talking about cricket, we've been talking at length about Cricket South Africa's governance flaw, and it's been mentioned in the report that the manner in which those appointments were conducted was a serious governance lapse from Cricket South Africa's side. So, I mean, it's good that that particular matter has been handled. I mean, if you remember that there was the issue of the match fixing part of SJN,
yes,
where Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza did say that maybe it was a bit of a red herring in that they discussed the match fixing issue instead of actually looking at whether there were discriminatory aspects of match fix or in the investigation in match fixing. Well, the report does actually go and put it very well that there wasn't any race issues involved with regards to the investigation of the match fixing saga. So I think in those particular instances, the report is very clear with how those matches were handled at the time. Yeah.
Let's come back to Mark Boucher then. That one for me stood out, like you said, possibly the biggest red herring of this report. We had Nkwe, we knew his credentials, level 4 coaching certificate, cricket certificate. Mark Boucher coming in, essentially demoting Nkwe to his assistant coach, and the report states, one of the testimony given was that basically Nkwe being demoted under Boucher was because of the color of his skin.
Well, look, I mean, if you look at it, there's no other way to the manner in which it is explained in that report and the manner in which that appointment was unraveled during the SJN, it's difficult to come to a different conclusion, to be honest. So, I mean, now, the qualifications are there. If you look at a particular aspect of the report, the qualifications are managed, are put down, the achievements are put down. So it becomes a clear-cut this thing. It's a decision of whether this discrimination was involved or not. And from the report, I mean, it spells it out very clearly. I mean, if there's one mitigation that Mark Boucher may have is that he doesn't hire himself as a coach. He was hired by someone. So I think now the Cricket South Africa board will have a very, I'd say a very difficult Christmas. I mean, they've achieved the level of transparency that they've espoused by, I mean, the report was handed in the 10th. It's already out now. It's the 15th. So they've literally looked at the report. They were happy with it. They've passed it on. They've released it to the public. So now they've left it up to the public to actually make up their mind with regards to how do they now digest the report. I guess now they've got the Christmas and the New Year period until official business resumes to see what kind of decision making they now arrive at.
Yeah. Speaking about that, I mean, I hear you when you say Mark Boucher didn't appoint himself, but then the report then further goes to say how direct, pointing the finger at Graham Smith on how he got Mark Boucher to be appointed. And then for me, second to that question, you got coaches like Jeffrey Toyana, who could have easily, in terms of achievements, got that position ahead of Mark Boucher.
You know, it now goes back to the decision makers at the time. As much as Graham would have had hiring powers, there were people who hired him. And it goes back to the governance lapses that the report mentions. In that, there was Dr. Jacques Fall was the acting CEO at the time, but in mitigation on his side, he wasn't the one who was actually running the hiring process. I think by the time that he was actually there, issues were pretty much cut and dried. Members of the previous board, Chris Nzani, South Africa's former president, has a lot to answer in this regard because, he would have been the one driving the process at this time. So, Graham will have a case to answer in how the processes of hiring a Mark Boucher would have answered. If you're a director of cricket,
yes,
you also need to be a bit savvy with human resources matters because also you as much as you are allowed in any business, you are allowed to headhunt. You still need to follow particular processes. And what the report espouses that the particular HR processes were not followed. So I think that's where now the number of the green will have to be dealt with, I think, at the end of the India series.
Yeah. I'm going to touch on another issue, Mark Boucher's behavior as a player. Coming under fire, a la Penispero, a la Vicky Momberg. Again, this report does not paint him a good picture, and there will be calls, as you've seen possibly in the socials, whether they matter or not, there will be calls for him to pack his bags.
Look, you can plead implausibility as much as you like, but I think, I think in this country, I may be corrected that you have criminal capacity around 14, 15. You'll become an adult at 18. If you are able to make certain things in adulthood, regardless of whether they happened 10, 15 years ago, you need to be able to account for it. If we're looking at what has been happening in the United Kingdom, where a celebrated player like Michael Vaughan, the former England captain, he's being made to answer for things he said to players of Asian origin in his time at Yorkshire. That was 10, 11 years ago. He has to, actually 12 years ago, he needs to answer for that. So a player, if you're over the age of 18, 20, 21, and I think your mind is fully formed. You have an idea of, not an idea, you have a sense of what is right and what is wrong.
Let's face it, Khanyiso. when you think of it, when you're going to call your colleagues, some people you sit in whether it's a dorm room, in the canteen, you sleep, you share dorms with, you share showers, derogatory terms or names, I'm not going to say them on air, and then you wake up and say, actually, I was young, I didn't mean it, I know better now. I don't know.
I think there are instances where you could say you know better, but in South Africa, if especially when you look at Mark Boucher's case, his adult life took place in post-1994. I think you would have grown up you would have seen environments. You would have seen environments where you would have quickly learned that there are certain ways and manners in which you talk to people. There are certain things that you can't say to other people. You would have think by the time, look, he was 21 when he made his test debut. Paul Adams was already a test cricketer at the time. I think the fact that there isn't a particular timeline of when the B word happened, it does kind of make it tricky as to how old Mark Boucher was then. But at the end of the day, he was an adult. He was an adult who was in control of his actions. He was an adult who said something that even he could have stopped and said, look, maybe I should not have said this. Those were actions that happened when he was an adult, and not, let's say, a preteen or a teenager where you could say, I've learned better now. He was an adult at the time, and I think he needs to be held to account for the words said in an adult.
Khanyiso, unfortunately, we're going to have to call it. We've run out of time. We'd like to have this conversation a bit further. Senior sports journalist, News 24, Khanyiso Tswakhu. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. In fact, on the back of that, over the weekend, we're trying to get the Ombudsman, Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza, to join us right here on SABC News Channel on Sports Live, where we have a full bulletin. We can go through the report itself. For myself and the team, good night for now.